Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Foundation Series webinar. Today we're focusing on navigating today's legal environment for small business. My name is Mark Landers, and I'm the managing partner, Hahn Landers and Company. Our focus is we are a firm based in the west end of Toronto, in Mississauga area, and we focus mainly working with emerging entrepreneurs and helping them create a strong foundation for the future growth and success of their business and family life. I want to set a little bit of context on our conversation today. We have a concept that we use called the planning horizon. What's a little bit unique about our firm is we believe there's two types of planning you need to do when structuring your finances for your future. There's planning you do above the horizon, and there's planning you do below the horizon. So one of our partners we're going to talk a bit about today is Roy, working with Epstein Associates. He would be one of these people that works well below the horizon, so helping people out with strategies, tactics, and tools, specifically in regards to legal affairs. His specialties mainly being in corporate and real estate law. What we also do at Hahn Landers, I think, is a little bit unique, is we do work above the horizon, which is focused on vision, values, and goals. And so our view is if we can get a real clear picture of what our clients' vision, values, and goals are for the future, we're in a tremendous spot to then move below the horizon and help them out with all the different pieces around strategies, tactics, and tools. So without further ado, I'll pass it along to our special guest, Roy, lawyer and partner, Epstein Associates. Roy's background obviously is prior to joining Epstein Associates in 2010, has extensive experience in a full-service North York law firm, also has an engineering background and has worked in renewable energy systems, technology, as well as on the patent side. So he's a partner at Epstein Associates, looks after the real estate department of the firm, as well as some key aspects of the administrative part of the business, also very active in the corporate law side of things. Very smart, intelligent, and also a very fun guy. I'll turn it over to our good friend, Roy. Welcome, Roy.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thanks for that very generous intro, Mark. Thanks just for having me and giving me the opportunity to speak to your audience. As Mark mentioned, I am one of the partners at Epstein Associates. We are a 21 lawyer firm now. We're full service, but as one of the partners, I help manage the real estate and corporate practices. So those are my two core areas of practice. In terms of corporate law, which my talk today is focused on, a lot of my clients are small businesses, startups. I've been with the firm for 12 years now, so a lot of the corporate clients that came in, 10 years ago are now growing in size. So I'd like to think my practice has grown with my clients, but we still deal quite often with, your mom and pop shop, sole proprietorships that are converting to a corporation, the mid-sized corporation, franchises, purchases and sales, or just general reorganizations that come with above horizon planning, like tax strategies, succession planning, things of that nature. What I tell clients from the get-go is there's always two sides of your analysis in terms of professional support. There's always your legals, but there's also a huge component, if not even more important, is the tax planning and the above the horizon planning, as Mark would put it. So with that said, I think we have a sort of a moderator that's monitoring any questions that you may have. Feel free to pose them as we go along. I'm happy if I'm able to, and if it's relevant, to answer any particular questions that come up. Otherwise, we can reserve some time at the end of my chat for question and answers. If we want to go ahead with the slides. It's already queued up. So I've kind of just structured this presentation sort of along the lines of what I would tell any person to have when they're looking at the legal components of their corporation is a checklist. And the checklist would really, go as follows. And by no means is this comprehensive. This is I'm going to take a very top level, generic or sort of general tact when we're having our presentation today. So starting off, and under the premise that you're just getting going, is pre-incorporation considerations. So number one, first of all, the decision to incorporate is again driven by, okay, legal, what does that mean legally, but also from a tax perspective, what does that mean? What does it get me in terms of a lower tax income rate? How do I get money out of this corporation? That's the name of the game ultimately, with a lot of motivation for incorporating. But there is also the legal side, which is you do get protection from personal liability. Ultimately, there is what's called the corporate veil, and for third parties to quote unquote pierce the corporate veil on liability, there's only certain circumstances in which they can do so. So long as you're running your business in a commercial, reasonable, fashion, absent of fraud, you as a director can't personally be held liable for third party liability, other than very specific things like HST liability, unpaid payroll deductions, things of that nature. So anyways, back to pre-incorporation considerations. So once you've made the decision to incorporate, question one is often, okay, do you want a named incorporation or a numbered corporation? And what are the types of share classes we have to structure? So the act of incorporation is filing with the ministry articles of incorporation. That's like the constitution of your corporation. And so just like a constitution, what goes in there is quite important as to what you can do going forward. And one of the core aspects of that is setting up share class definitions. A lot of these online services that do incorporation on the cheap, they often just set up one level of unlimited common shares, which, for a lot of businesses is all you need. But if you're going to get into, longer term growth, structuring tax strategies to minimize tax, you may want to set up different classes of shares, or even if you envision taking on partners, but you don't want to give them voting rights. So setting up your share class definitions are quite important. Do you want to set two classes of common shares, voting and non-voting? Do you want to set up preference shares that have no votes, and really they give the directors the right to to issue dividends to these classes at their discretion? These are all things you want to consider. And they should be considered pre-incorporation, because if you incorporate with just one class of shares, then you got to sort of pay all the fees to file articles of amendment and sort of redo things. So, that's one thing to consider. In terms of named versus numbered, really there's not much difference other than if you have a named incorporation, someone out there can't then incorporate a corporation with the same name. Now that's different from name protection or trademark protection, which is something we're going to talk about a little later in the presentation. If you have a numbered sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Roy, quick question.
Yeah,
I know I've seen this with some of our clients over time. Is they're making some changes to their business. Perhaps they've brought a spouse into the business and they want to explore the possibility of adding on the spouse for as a shareholder as a potential planning strategy. And I know that there's tax implications if you do that for an established business. Do you have any sort of opinion on adding a spouse as a shareholder, on an initial incorporation? Any thoughts on that? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. Number one, I always, again, start with the perspective of deferral to your tax advisors. Okay, what benefit is it going to get you from a tax perspective? I know, several years ago, the government sort of closed some of the loopholes about income splitting. And now there, a family member that you're adding to, split income, there needs to be some active component of their involvement with the organization in order to get the tax benefit. From a legal perspective, the important thing to know is that shareholders of privately held Canadian corporations can't be held liable for the actions of the corporation, right? So if your question is there any extra liability to a spouse? I'd say no, right? Other than certain very limited circumstances. If the question is, hey, should I add my spouse as a director of the corporation? The answer is often, hey, let's give that some more thought, because directors can be held personally liable for a small range of circumstances. Again, like I've had situations where, you know, Joe Smith, the contractor, who's amazing at his job, but just terrible at business legal organization, has done, his work diligently, but has never paid HST, right? The government can come after directors personally, and if you've named your spouse as a director, lo and behold, your spouse is now exposed as well. So if you own, your home, your matrimonial home, or rental properties, those are now exposed. So that's often for, husband-wife businesses. I say, okay, it's fine to have both spouses as shareholders, but maybe just have one of you as a director. And by the way, if it's like a business that comes with potential liability, one of those industries like, like I said, general contracting, then maybe if you're able to, put your spouse who's not a director as the title holder of your home, or, kind of move your assets in that type of way.
Interesting. Okay, great. So I know you're talking about shareholder agreements. I know that's a big one that's important. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just understanding the sheer importance of those shareholder agreements. You'd be surprised by how many clients come in the door. I'd almost say more than half come in without a shareholder agreement, like after a couple years of operating with a partner. And it kind of makes sense on a human level. Small businesses, you start, the world is your oyster. You have a business partner, your buddies, you're kind of in it together. Everybody's kind of working towards the same goal. So everything is sort of collaborative and cooperative, and you don't want to have that discussion about what if things go wrong, but you have to. I tell everybody going into business with someone is just like getting married. It's just as important. You're entangling financially, right? Your financial, future is dependent on this other person. And so a shareholders agreement, consider it like a prenup, right? Again, it's not often not a comfortable conversation, but it's a conversation you have to have. I'd say it's easier to talk about than a prenup, because but it's so a shareholders agreement, ultimately it's something you hope you never need, but you want in place in case things go sideways, right? What if you just come to a sheer fundamental difference of opinion on how the business is run, and one of you's got to go? What does that look like, right? Have you agreed upon like a buy-sell mechanism? Hey, should we have a mechanism in place to value the corporation, so that we can determine a sell price? Things like that. Without a shareholders agreement, there's a void in terms of how to operate, and you have to work with the Business Corporations Act that could give a shareholder the right to maybe demand for the wind up of the corporation, the nuclear option, something where kind of everybody loses. So having a shareholder agreement that deals with a standstill between shareholders, or the death of a shareholder, or if a shareholder is offered someone to buy their shares, what happens to the other guy's shares? Is there a right of first refusal? All that kind of stuff should go in the shareholders agreement. Also, hey, how have you guys structured paying yourselves, right? Are you going to be paying yourselves a salary? Are you going to be paying yourselves dividends, or are you going to treat yourselves as independent contractors? That plays into kind of the last topic, employment contracts. So I'll speak to that a bit more. But before you get started, a shareholder agreement is one of the first things you should think about. Yeah, especially if you're dealing with like a non-spouse partner. Husband and wives, I'd understand if there's, hey, why go to the lengths of spending a couple grand on a shareholders agreement? It's just us, right? But if you're bringing in someone from outside, it's definitely something that you need to be aware of and understand the importance of. Next issue on the table is trademark and patent issues. So A lot of corporations, their core assets can be, an invention or sort of the name behind what you're selling. And so also this goes back to the whole name versus numbered idea. Just because you name your corporation, Widget 123 Co. doesn't mean you've got name protection. In order to get absolute protection on that name, you need to register trademark. And for that, you need a trademark agent. So you may have, if you're already up and running as a business, but you've never had that trademark protection, that may be something you want to look into, right? You may come across a day where someone comes up and starts using that name, and you're saying, hey, wait a second, I have ownership of that name. Well, do you really? You have to understand the scope of what you can enforce in terms of somebody else's infringement of you. Or, hey, did you do the due diligence to know that you can use that business name without infringing somebody else's trademark? A lot of people, the funny thing with the way the Business Names Act goes is any person can operate under any business so long as they register that business name. And when you register the business name, there's no catch to say, oh, there's someone that already has that trademark. That's something that you have to do on your own separately with the trademark office. So that's something you should watch out for to make sure you pick the right name. I've had clients in the past that had been running for 2 years, and lo and behold, they get a letter from a lawyer saying, you're infringing our trademark. We trademarked this name, 5 years ago. You've got to completely change your name, which is devastating it can be devastating for a business because you've built your name, your website, everybody's being driven to you from that name. So one thing to really consider. Commercial contracts is the next topic. Derek, if you want to flip to that, I had there's sub slides to all these, but commercial contracts, there's a, distribution, if you are selling widgets, do you have an agreement, like a formal agreement in place? Again, when you're starting out, you want to stay lean. You're worried about your costs because they can balloon. Your money's coming out every which direction, and a lot of people. I've had business clients start businesses juggling credit cards, and you hear those legends and myths of people that do that. They start at the garage, and so I really understand the kind of instinct to keep costs low and to pick and choose what you're going to spend money on in terms of legal review, legal drafting. But it really is important to understand an agreement. You can still have an agreement verbally. There are legally binding verbal agreements, but at the end of it, you have to prove what the terms were. And that can be difficult. Piecing together 5 emails that set out your terms of an agreement where there was amendments on this or that day, it can just prove difficult. And really, you want to reduce things into writing, even if it's as much as a final email saying, hey, distributor X, per our previous 7 emails, the terms of our agreement are X, Y, Z, this, please confirm, right? Offer acceptance, comprehensive terms. You want an agreement that's reduced to writing, and it's so vital. We have so many clients that come up with litigation issues where I ask them, what was your contract? And the answer is, I don't know. And so, you can only leverage as a lawyer what the parties agreed to in the beginning. And if it's something in verbal, then the exercise is, okay, well, what the heck was agreed to? What are the terms? So putting something in writing that's explicit saves you a lot of time and expense should things go sideways. Same with licensing, right?
I'm just going to ask you, Roy, on the contract side.
Sure.
I mean, I think if you've been in business for a while, you've come across, whether it be a supplier or someone sends you a contract, and sometimes you get a contract that's got, well, I'll say there's 3 types of contracts that I've seen. One is something that's very informal that you can tell that a non-legally minded person has written. And then obviously you've got the other end, which is a contract that's so language intense with Latin and all these wonderful terms that you spent many years learning at law school. And then, there's those ones in the middle where you can tell somebody's really taken the time to kind of, I'll just say dumb it down for guys like me that, maybe don't know all the legal buzzwords and stuff like that. So I guess my question is how do you, like, I guess when do you know to turn to a lawyer to get a contract reviewed, or when can you kind of say, oh, I think I understand this, I can sign it? Like, do you have any guidance on that, or? So.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, number one, I think you hit the nail on the head, is that there's a legal side. Any lawyer can tell you, hey, watch out for this and that, but there's a practical component, right? Like, you're in business, you don't want to be a drag on people's times. You're trying to establish a friendly relationship with a lot of these companies. So, not overburdening them with some 20-page document to say my lawyer needs this signed, that can be a turnoff for a lot of parties where it kills the deal. So my approach is always to, try to remove as much of that overburdensome legalese as you can. The thing is it's such case by case, because it's one of those things where sometimes you just don't know. Like, everything in a contract can be all good, very explicit, very easy to understand, but sometimes it's not knowing that there's this one thing you have to be wary of on that particular issue. And that's the part that makes us as lawyers sometimes nervous. If a client is saying, hey, Roy, I want to do half this deal on my own, right? And hey, I deal with so many business owners that are smarter than me, that really kind of understand the gears, but that they just have blind spots, right? And not because it's a lack of comprehension. It's really just they didn't know that the Retail Sales Act requires a clearance certificate, right? On this or that. So it's stuff like that. So it can really depend. And in my partnerships with my clients, I try to be as honest as possible. Hey, flip me, and I do that in a way where it's flip me what you have, right? I'll take a really brief look at it in terms of the nature, the scope of what you're looking at. And if it's something that you need me to review in detail, I'll let you know and I'll quote you on it. Otherwise, I often tell people, no, I think you're good as is. You don't need me to lawyer this. So I really recommend, you find a partnership with a lawyer that you can work with in that way, where it's easy to get that flow going, rather than someone you're afraid is going to charge you 2 hours time every time you send them something. And there's plenty of amazing corporate lawyers out there in every place. So find that person that works for you and that's willing to kind of work with you in that sense, and know that, hey, it's a partnership much more than a per service, fee type transaction, right? It's you're growing with the client. So that's what I'd say, is that, oftentimes I'll say, run it by me, right? And I'll let you know if it's something you can do on your own, or with an easier template, or something you can just find online, versus something that we got to take a red pen and go through it. Yeah, great question though, because not everything needs a lawyer. Yeah, absolutely. And oftentimes what we'll do is, hey, you're going to be a business that employs employees from now until forever. So we'll give you a generic templated employment agreement that you can just cut and paste, right, and adapt as you see fit. Same with distributors, right? If you have 20 different distributors, we're not gonna, you're not going to need a high level analysis of every agreement. It could be something where you cut and paste. It's a precedent that you get, and you owner, once you've gone through it once and you understand it, you can use it for every other distributor coming down. Yeah, I mean, that's the message. It's nothing groundbreaking. It's just paper your agreements.
Makes sense.
Yeah. The last topic is employment law considerations, and this one can be quite important. And I think sort of understanding the tax implications is very important as well. Is that the way corporations exist and the way they're defined is that they are separate legal entities. So they exist apart from you, the individual. In law school, they teach you you're almost like giving birth to a new person in the eyes of the government and the law. Like, your corporation, it's its own being. So it's responsible for its own tax returns. It's its own party when it contracts with other parties. And so you, as the founder, have a relationship with that corporation. What is that relationship? There are different tiers of that relationship. So a lot of founder owners of a small mom and pop place are three things. They're the shareholder of 100% of the shares. They're also the director, and then they're also an officer of the corporation. And whether that's as an employee or an independent contractor, that's another sort of tier of that definition. So understanding each type of relationship and the hierarchy there is important. At the end of the day, a lot of people incorporate and they say, well, how do I get my money out and how do I report my taxes to the government? What is income of the corporation versus my income, right? So any owner or shareholder can also be an employee. And by that, I mean like a T4 employee where you get a salary from your corporation. And that's different from getting dividends, right? But so that's one way. The other way is being an independent contractor of the corporation, right? Having the corporation issue or you issuing the corporation invoices. Hey, I'm doing one-off jobs and the corporation is paying me, right? Just like they'd pay, a sign maker or the person that maintains your driveway or your lawn services. And then the third way is dividends issued at the end of the year or as the year goes on if there's surplus, right? Now each of those forms of compensation carry with it different tax implications, right? You can get the corporation and you as the recipient can be taxed in different ways, and so having a solid understanding of the interplay of that and meeting with your tax advisors on what the best way to pay yourselves are, and as well having that conversation with your partner as well is, hey, if I'm kind of the boots on the ground partner and you're the silent investor, should I be compensated, carved out a certain amount just in consideration of the fact that I'm actually doing the work of an employee as well, and should that be paid to me as an employee before we take 50-50 dividends at the end of the year? Those are things that you have to think about when it comes to your founders or shareholders agreement, but also your tax analysis. And so not only that, that's just you yourself being employed by the corporation, but when we're talking about employing other individuals, other employees, a lot of founders, they're first-time business owners. They don't quite understand the liability rights that come with terminating an employee. So at the end of the day, anybody can terminate, you can terminate any employee you want to. You don't need a reason. But if you're terminating them without cause, you have to provide them with adequate notice. And the Employment Standards Act says for every year that they've been with you, 1 week per year of service. So if you have an employee that's worked with you for 2 years, you want to terminate them without cause, you're just trying to streamline your expenses, you can serve them notice and say, you have 2 weeks notice, you're being terminated in 2 weeks. Now, what most businesses do is they'll give pay in lieu of notice. So rather than have someone that might be disgruntled stick around for 2 weeks, you're going to pay them 2 weeks upfront as a lump sum instead of them sticking around, and they leave that day. So you have that choice. Now, just because the Employment Standards Act says 1 week per year of service doesn't always mean that that's what they're entitled to. And this is a big thing that a lot of business owners may not know, is that there's the statutory rights, but there's also common law rights. And Canada is a common law jurisdiction, meaning in addition to all these statutes, we also have case law that informs the statutes and says, oh, how do you interpret the statute, or is there other cases that override the statute? And there are cases that override statute when it comes to employment law. And if you have an employment agreement that doesn't set out your termination rights and that they should adhere to the Employment Standards Act, you could, as a employer, be liable for up to 1 month per year of service. So it's really important to get your employment contracts right and the severance and termination terms in your employment contract right, so that you're limiting your exposure to maybe 1, or if you decide you want to give more, like 2 weeks, but you don't want to leave yourself open to common law, which can override the statute. And that's one key thing to take from this section of the presentation is have a look at the termination sections in your employment contracts. That's it for my side.
I'm going to ask some bonus questions here. So
sure.
First, on the employment law side, I think that there was, over the last couple of years with COVID and everything, there was some definite, fluidity around some of these employment law things around, what if somebody gets sick at the workplace and what's the liability? There was some stuff with vaccines, and I know that different employers had inputted these policies around vaccines in the office and that sort of thing. Is there any? And I know that we're fingers crossed. Hopefully, we're at the back end of COVID in our lives and that sort of thing. But I'm just wondering, from an employment law standpoint, any kind of closing thoughts around COVID and some of the different changes, and what's the best from an employer standpoint going forward, how to best manage that kind of thing, so
that's a whole can of worms. Yeah. I mean, it's like a hot button issue. I'll start by saying, by no means am I like an employment lawyer specific to employment law, but generally, yeah, we have to somewhat keep apprised of those issues. Sort of earlier on, one of the key things that I would advise clients is to have a good look at the layoff provisions in your employment, temporary layoff provisions in your employment contract, because that was key in knowing what your rights were if you needed to do temporary layoffs, right? If the nature of your business was impacted such that you just can't keep the same people, but you don't want to terminate them permanently. There was some flexibility with what you could do with layoffs. In terms of, terminating someone simply because, they refuse to get vaccinated. The trouble is, like I said, it's a common law jurisdiction. A lot of those cases have yet to be litigated, right? And I'm sure they're in the pipeline, and 2-3 years, or 2 years from now, we're going to have a prevalence of case law that's going to say, oh, employer did this, they were found out of bounds, and now we know how to act in, on the next pandemic. All I would say is just err on the side of caution. A lot of employers or business owners are personalities. They'll sometimes act kind of on emotion or very quickly, but that is one area of employment law where you should seek advice, right? How to deal with a particular situation. Go and seek out an employment lawyer, right? Or at least your corporate lawyer who you have a partnership with, and they may have tips and tricks for you. Set out a defined policy if possible. You can, there's a lot of, one of the best places I can point you to is, what's the name of it? I will send a link to you, Mark, and you can distribute amongst the attendees. There are a lot of these online HR resources. So a lot of these companies now are popping up where they're taking advantage of companies that don't want to pay for their internal HR. So they'll centralize a whole bunch of great HR resources where you can generate a corporate policy, an employment policy. So I'll direct a lot of smaller businesses that don't have the budget for all these, for a sophisticated HR department, to these resources where you can functionally get all the benefits of an HR department through these third-party websites. They're actually fantastic, and for our law firm, we have a subscription. We use a lot of their materials. It's great, and they invest all this time on COVID policies. So don't try to solve it on your own. Like there's help out there. Get independent advice on the particular circumstances, because it could be pretty disruptive for your business if you have a client, or if you have an employee that's demanding or alleging discrimination based on them not being vaccinated, or some other employee at the firm isn't vaccinated but you are. Why should they be able to come in the office every day? That kind of stuff. We know it's commonplace. So I know that wasn't the greatest answer, but get your legal advice in each case.
Well, no, hey, it's good perspective, and again, hopefully a lot of that's behind us, but who knows? I mean, it's been an uncertain world the last couple of years. I'm gonna pick on your brain a little bit. I'm gonna leverage kind of both sides of your specialty, corporate and real estate, because I think that a common thing we talk to a lot of our clients about. Some of them have probably not applicable for a startup business, but if you have a growing business where they're having some success, maybe they have some office space that they're renting, and perhaps they're contemplating maybe buying a building or office space or commercial condo or whatnot. So any thoughts or kind of best practices around, I would say maybe around how to set yourself up appropriately so that if an opportunity like that comes up, you can take advantage of it, you know?
Sure. Yeah, one thing to look at, and again, not to say that it's always the answer, but something that you should consider as an option subject to your tax and your legal advice is there a benefit in, buying property X under a separate holdco that's separate and apart from your opco, right? And the reason for that is some companies will set themselves up to have a holding company that's completely separate of their operating company. Let's say you have like a farming business or, even if a landscaping business, right? All your tractors, your trucks, your lawn equipment, you can own under a separate corporation that rents it out to your operating company. And that way, if your operating company were for whatever reason to be sued, or lose be subject to some type of court judgment, there's no assets for third party to get at. Your assets are protected in a separate corporation. So that's one scheme that a lot of businesses will employ and a lot of it's a function of scale. Does it make sense to spend the extra legals on creating and maintaining a separate incorporation to do that? So again, all of this is not to say that's always the answer, but it's something maybe you want to consider is understand what the cost benefit of it is. And if you need that, if it's a type of business that doesn't have a lot of liability exposure, then maybe you don't need it, right? So it's something you kind of want to think about, but that's one scheme that's can sometimes be beneficial, is split out your holdco. And there are tax advantages too, right? You can rent out the assets of the holdco to the opco, and this opco, gets to write off those expenses to bring down some of the taxable income. Now, on the other side, it's going to get that income here, but the balance can be struck if you do your tax analysis to see what's the most efficient. That's one thing. Another thing to think about is, okay, if I'm buying this corporation, or not even have a holdco, do I personally want to buy this building and then rent it to my opco, right? One of the considerations is financing, right? If you have to get mortgage financing to acquire the building, corporate and commercial financing often comes with it higher rates, mortgage rates. That's kind of another subset of lending that carries with it different rates. Can you get a better rate as an individual buying that versus your corporation? Your corporation may not have any credit history, so may require your personal guarantee on the liability. So if the tax implications aren't too crazy, keep in mind if it's a commercial property and you're buying it yourself, in any event, there's capital gains going to be accruing on the eventual sale of that building. But is there any benefit to you buying it personally over using a corporation is another thing to at least look at.
Yeah, lots of moving parts, and I think real estate's an interesting one just because obviously real estate's been just a real tremendous growth asset over the last 10 or 15, 20 years. It'd be interesting to see kind of what happens with some of the interest rate changes and some of the different government policies on kind of what that looks like in the future. But I would say, a lot of our clients that have had great success and, have grown their businesses, owning their land or owning where they operate out of has been a great best practice. So I think it makes lots of sense,
Absolutely. Yeah.
I don't know. I think that's kind of we're a little bit early, but I think that's good because, we're also used to being back to back on meetings, give everyone a little bit of breathing room before their next discussion. But before I wrap things up, any kind of closing thoughts on your end, Roy, there?
Not really. The one thing I guess I haven't touched on that I might, I'm probably going to include on future slides is don't ignore insurance. People will incorporate thinking they have the safety of the corporate veil, which there's an extra added layer of protection, but always think about insurance. Your answer to potential liability should always be insurance. Liability insurance, professional insurance, depending on the type of business you act in. That's your number one safety net. And then obviously, you know, the corporate veil is another level. So that's one thing that maybe I didn't touch on before. Yeah, but otherwise, you know, find the right people, right? You know, we always say, you know, I'm the last person to try to, you know, repave my driveway because I know it'll be twice as expensive if I try to do it on my own. So, you know, find the right individuals that are not a good fit, and that'll save you from future cost.
No, it makes a lot of sense. Nice, nice segue there, Roy. So I'll thank you for your time. I'll just kind of wrap this up here. I'll pull this horizon slide back up for all the attendees, just to sort of remind you. And I know we touched on it earlier. Roy touched on his talk, and our general view is all of these things, and getting your legal setup right, and employment contracts, or buying real estate, or getting your insurances correct. They're all great strategies. And I think what comes back to is, if you can get really clear on your vision, your values, and the goals for the future of your business and your personal affairs, you're in a much better position to make great financial, legal, tax, insurance, banking, all of these important decisions, which we would call below the horizon. So our just view is, make sure you're clear on your vision for the future. And then if you got that figured out, it'll be really easy to plug all the holes with the different strategies to help you get there. Yeah, so that's kind of, I guess, where I'll leave that. So again, thanks very much for your time. We appreciate it. Our next webinar in the Foundation Series is going to be Wednesday, August 17th, 1 p.m., so a few months. So I wish everyone a tremendous summer. And great to see that we're getting some warm weather and some hopefully some time with friends and family. Myself or Roy, both of us are here to help out. If you have any specific questions about your business and how some of these things apply, we're happy to help you out. And what we are going to do as well is we're going to forward out a copy of this presentation out via email, probably in the next, I guess, 4 or 5 days when we get her up on the website. So you've got it for your records. And if you have further questions or would like to have a consultation, please feel free to reach out. We're going to have our contact information on the screen there and also be in the email. But thanks to everyone for your time. Roy, thanks for your guidance and wisdom. And yeah, wish everyone a really great afternoon, and let us know if we can be of help. Thanks very much.